Mark and Scylla, again, thank you for taking the time. I really appreciate it at the end of the week to be here and talk with me and everyone about Harvard and this Overseers campaign.
We're so excited to be here. I think that, like, just very tactically, I think it's important to remind people that this is the process to get you even on the ballot. So this is
Yes,
not
correct.
to even like vote for you. I think people have plenty of time to learn more about you and decide who they want to vote for in the Board of Overseers. This is literally just to get you on the ballot, which I applaud you for all of your efforts and your dedication and love for Harvard and your willingness to do what has been, several months of work to get on the ballot to sort of make your case of why you'd love to do this.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. It has been, I will tell you, as with most good things in life, you decide to do them and you know they're going to be a lot of work, and then you start doing them and they're 10 times more work than you expected. So I think
So
this
so
goes
that's
goes in the
but that's our goal for today is we want to convince as many of the people who are joining that it's worth it to go set up a Harvard Key account so we can get through this somewhat difficult process of nominating Sam. We're more confident than in a vote situation that he'll do well, but getting over that first hurdle is a big deal. So
Yes.
I really appreciate everyone taking the time on a Friday afternoon, evening on the East Coast to tune in.
And
Sam,
I know,
where do you want to start? Should we just
well, I just
jump in
want
and
to
embarrass
say,
you and say some things?
I want to say I've done my part. I voted for Sam. And
Thank
I
you.
guess this is your way of supporting Sam, Mark, because I want to remind everyone that Mark cannot vote in this election or in this sign-in
My
process.
my honorary Doctor of Letters is meaningless in this context.
I can't believe that they don't let you have a doctorate from Harvard, you can't vote. It's
I
wild.
don't know. Yeah.
It's a
Anyway,
knockoff. It's a knockoff.
anyway, I think we are all here today, or at least the vast majority of people joining, because I think we care about Harvard, right? And believe it's an important institution in the world, and believe that when Harvard succeeds, then that not only creates volumes of great research that advance the world, but also is just important for training generations and in terms of the values and skills they need to be able to then go on to shape the world positively. Um, and this is something that Priscilla and I obviously care about a lot, and I think a lot of the people who are on the call do. And I know we all engage in the university in different ways. I mean, Priscilla and I have started, worked with the university to start programs, and most recently this AI center, the Kempner Center, to hopefully help advance the university in another area that's going to be important for the future. But the other reason why we're here is because we believe that Sam would be really helpful in shaping the institution going forward. I mean, we have both had the honor of getting to know and knowing Sam for a long time. I met him in college and just got to know him a lot better over time, including a stint of several years of him working as a product leader at at what was then Facebook, now Meta. Um, and I just think that Sam is the kind of person who you want helping to oversee an important institution like this. And he has the intelligence and judgment and values and ethics, and energy to engage in something like this and help make an institution that I think we all believe in and care about, um, just to make sure it continues going in a positive direction for the future. So that's why I'm here and why I wanted to take the time to do this, and both to hear, ask you some questions and hear how you're thinking about stuff, but also just to give my kind of full endorsement that I think I think it would be great. And I'm grateful personally that you're taking the time to go through this process and do this, because I think it's going to be great for the university.
Yeah, this is a labor of love, and this is your way and our way of expressing our deep love for the institution and care for its future. So
Well, thank you
Sam,
guys. Thanks a lot.
why don't we? That's our impression of you.
Thank you.
And so, but why don't you tell everyone a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, look, I grew up in Englewood, New Jersey. I was Harvard '05, so I was a little bit older, but I got to meet Mark in Kirkland House way back in the day, which is a wild set of a long time ago now. After Harvard, I was at Bain for a few years. I started a company. As Mark said, I got to work, with him on some incredibly awesome stuff at a crazy time at Facebook, now Meta, for many years. And then I started a fund out west. And so now I'm a venture capitalist and I back other young entrepreneurs. I get to interact with one of the cool parts about my job is I get to interact with a lot of young people coming out of Harvard, coming out of great schools and hear kind of their stories and help support what they're up to. So that's what I've been doing. I'm married to a Harvard alum. I met my wife, Jessica, in college. We dated since and married. We now have 3 kids who are 7, 5, and 2. And I live just south of San Francisco. So I've been somewhat bi-coastal in my life. And yeah, I mean, I think just to jump in for a second, I mean, to me, we can get into a little bit of this, but it's clear that I think there are opportunities to help Harvard, kind of moving forward. And, I think when I kind of saw what was going on this fall in particular, I've always cared a lot about Harvard and always tried to be very involved. I really thought to myself, like, what else can I do to try to lean in? I know a lot of friends, obviously not Mark and Scylla, but others who kind of have seen some of the challenges in higher ed and said, look, we're going to go work on other things. Like we're technologists, we're, people who like to build new things, right? And so, there's the impulse to say we can go build something else and build it better. But I think Harvard really matters as an institution and I really care about it. And so I think when kind of facing some of these challenges, I thought to myself, well, what can I do that's more? And, there are 2 boards that govern Harvard. There's the corporation, which probably more people are familiar with. It's kind of a pretty tightly held group. It's currently 12, well, it's supposed to be 13 people who kind of self-perpetuate in terms of who they choose as their successors. And then there's the overseers, which is this alumni organization, right? So it's kind of, it's voted on by the alums. The alums select who's on it. And they're the kind of other board that together kind of lead Harvard. So that's kind of the opportunity, that I have, right? And that I was like, when I was thinking my doing a little bit of an end of year thinking about how to lean in and really be helpful, to me, it just seemed like an important thing to try to get on the board of overseers and see if I could make a difference.
I know people hopefully will be jumping on and off this call. I'm just going to put the website to answer one of the questions of how do you nominate Sam for the Board of Overseers. He needs 3,300 votes. We don't think he's there yet because the Harvard has not confirmed. I feel like I'm on a telethon, but
we're going to keep going all night until
we're going to keep going. But check out this website. It has a little bit more about Sam and it has instructions on how you can nominate him for the Board of Overseers.
Thank you, sir.
All right, Mark, what should we talk about next?
Well, I mean, I think maybe an open-ended question before jumping into some of the specific issues, but I'm just curious what you've learned from this campaign so far. I mean, there are a lot of different issues to talk about. We'll get through a number of them, but what's kind of stood out from the conversations that you've had with different alums?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I went into this, not knowing what to expect and kind of just saying I was going to put my hat in the ring. And obviously having support from a bunch of friends has been great. But I'll tell you the most surprising and kind of wonderful thing of doing this is I've had the opportunity through doing this to talk to so many people across the university. Members of the corporation have reached out and I've spent time with them, in person and on the phone, several overseers, also a lot of faculty, a lot of professors, administrators, et cetera, have all kind of reached out and wanted to engage in kind of some of the platform points I've put forward and talk about it. And to be honest, it's been an extremely positive experience. Like what's been clear to me is that there's a lot of people that not only deeply care about Harvard, but broadly agree with a lot of the things that, I've been talking about and focused on, whether we're talking about really refocusing on like the Veritas mission and the academic mission of the school, some of the free speech issues we can get into, things like that. So I think there really is like quite a lot of support across the organization, I think, for some of the changes in that I think could be effective, and some of the government's evolutions you could think about. So it's been really positive from that perspective. I think the pessimistic part, right, if the optimism is like there's clearly this very large silent-ish majority of people that believe these things, right? The pessimistic part is that, it is a large, complicated institution. There's a lot of administrators, there's a lot of schools, there's a lot of components to it. And I mean, we've seen this before. I've had the privilege of being involved in a lot of technology companies that went from very small to very big very quickly. And what you see is that, some of the realities of operating a large platform are very, very different than when you kind of have a small school. So Harvard has been on a 400-year journey there instead of a 5 or 10-year journey there, which is kind of what I've seen in Silicon Valley at warp speed, right? Over and over again in different things. But it does feel like the challenge is that just with 400 years, becoming a truly global, important platform that's very complicated and has lots of different components to it, you can say, I believe in these principles or we need to move in this direction. The challenge is actually making it happen, right? And figuring out, administratively, where do you have to go? How do you have to think about policies? And kind of, there's been a lot of let's put it this way, there's a lot of complexity and red tape that comes up, starting with things like the fact that you need, 3 times as many signatures with a Harvard key to get on the nomination for an overseer as you do to get in a congressional race in the United States, right?
All right, so maybe we should just jump right into some of the audience questions because they're coming in.
Sure.
So I'm just going to read some of the questions that are
Yeah.
coming in. So
Mark,
this,
I have it pulled up here. Why don't I read it? It's an
okay, go
audience.
for it.
Yeah, it's an audience question. I'm sort of summarizing a couple because this one has come up as a theme. Is this individual is concerned about free speech and anti-Semitism at Harvard, and how much control does the Board of Overseers has to help address the direction that Harvard University is going in?
Yeah, I think this is a great question. So when I started this campaign, a lot of people I know said to me, Sam, it's really great that you want to lean in, but you do realize the overseers have no power. Like, this is a ceremonial board, it's kind of a board that, people who have been very invested in Harvard get on and they do some academic review. The more I've dug in, you actually realize the overseers actually do have quite a bit of power, even if they haven't been recently using it. We can get into the governance implications of that and how to evolve it. But when you think about the formal powers of the overseers, they're on the presidential search committee and have a veto on presidents, right? They have a veto on corporation appointments. They have a veto on a lot of really senior, important things. Now, it's true that they haven't used it very much recently, but the reality is when you have those types of rights, when you're on the presidential search committee, when you have the ability to ask questions and you have the ability to kind of point research and shine light in a bunch of different directions. So I think we'll talk about kind of from the anti-Semitism perspective and free speech. These are things I deeply care about. I think they're also related. And I do think that you think about the kind of hierarchy of helping with governance problems and fixing some governance issues, fixing some things around mission focus and mission drift on effectively starting with academics first and thinking of all the inputs to that, including free speech, right? Academic free speech is a key input to, academic excellence as a core. And then candidly, I think of a lot of what we've seen with anti-Semitism on campus from my personal perspective is much more of a canary in the coal mine versus like the fundamental problem. So I do think it needs to be addressed, but I think that the way you address it has to be not just by trying to band-aid it or specifically, but actually dealing with kind of more of these structural problems. I do think the overseers have a real stake in this and a real say, especially if they assert kind of historically, the actual formal role they have, which I do think there's appetite for them to do. I think it's a little bit of a change from what's been done recently, but I think it's in everyone's interest for the overseers to step up a little bit in that way. Candidly, I think it's even in the corporation's interest, which we can get into. And I think from that perspective, as an overseer, even if I'm just one of 30 voices to start, I think you really can unlock a lot and help with those types of issues. So it's complicated, but I think the short answer is I think you can have a real say and you can really help.
Yeah. So in terms of the process, there's a question here from, pardon me if I mispronounce the name, Michelle Barmazel. Sam, have you been in contact with any current Board of Overseers members? And if so, what are the takeaways?
I have. Actually, several have reached out, and I've talked to many of them. And as I kind of said, it's actually been, it's made me more optimistic in a lot of ways, because I think the reality is of the Board of Overseers members I've talked to, and they've all asked to be anonymous when I reference them for understandable reasons. To some point, but there's been a lot of agreement that there needs to be change, that the overseers need to step up, that some of the things we've been talking about in terms of mission drift and refocusing on academic excellence as like the core veritas value of Harvard, they're supportive. Now, I think the thing is that in terms of getting there, you do need sometimes some people who are willing to come a little bit from the outside and be insiders and push a little bit more publicly on some of these things. I think the reality is, for a lot of organizational reasons, sometimes people, even people who are very successful and powerful and overseers and all that stuff, they are sometimes afraid to kind of speak up in public. And I do think you need people who are willing to do that, which I am. So in talking to overseers, I mean, the takeaways have been, it's complicated. There's a lot of facets to it, and there's a lot of administrative changes and small kind of details of governance that need to be adjusted in order to unlock things. But the general takeaway I've had is a lot of positivity, that it's not like, you know, a lot of these values and the things I'm expressing and trying to run on are antithetical to the entire direction of the board. There's actually quite a few people on the board who are very aligned with them.
All right. Well, another question that came in separately is from a grad student who asked what role you think that students can play in some of the issues that you're talking about in terms of fostering unity and a good environment on campus.
Yeah, so to me, the interesting place from talking to a lot of young alums, I was actually it was a wild experience for me as a 40-year-old now at a young alum event this week in San Francisco. So talking to a lot of people there and talking to a lot of others, you know, there seems like this evolved since our era, this kind of weird split on campus, where I would argue when I was at Harvard, the culture of free speech in the classroom was extreme, right? People really felt safe to explore any idea, right? To speak up in class, and it was all in the pursuit of truth and and like learning, right? In like a very civil way. And I thought that was a great culture. I've actually talked to other Harvard alums through this process. You know, one notably yesterday was Harry Hartz, who's a federal judge. We were talking the same thing in the 70s. He was saying, you know, there was this culture, it was one of the most magical things to have freedom to explore ideas in class in an academic setting. And so it does seem, talking to a lot of young alums, that they are scared to speak up in class, right? That they don't feel like all ideas are welcome, and that they don't have that same dynamic in class. While on the outside, you know, when you go into Harvard Yard and in the freshman, you know, near the freshman dorms or places like that, you know, what you're seeing is a lot of speech that might not be targeted so much towards actually promoting academics and learning, right, as much as trying to silence other voices. And I think so there's been this weird thing where there's like a lot of speech outside of the classroom and maybe not enough inside the classroom. I think the best thing you can do as a student, you know, is, if you believe in these principles, is one, try to speak up in class, right? Like mirror the behavior, like don't be afraid, even when it might be consequences to kind of express different viewpoints, like be fearless from that perspective, because it'll encourage others to do the same, right? And so I think the more that students can do that in class, the better. And then outside of class, I mean, I think the thing I would think twice about for any student, I'd ask them to think about is, Harvard is an academic institution, and its goal is to create, again, the best scholarship and have the best environment for students to learn, right? And so if your speech is in service of that, that's great. If your speech is not in service of that, or, you know, or is basically creating disruptions to that, that's, I think, a thing that all the parties of the university need to think about, from administrators to corporation members to students as well, right? In terms of what types of speech, you know, to promote versus not with their actions. So that's how I would think about it. But I do think the biggest thing as a student is, you know, the speech culture is informed by a lot of things. It's not solely the responsibility of students, but students being brave and speaking up, I think, is, you will set an example, and you can kind of drive the culture that way as well.
One of the questions that was submitted, I think, speaks to Harvard's unique role as an institution. The question from, you know, Varun Bhartia is, how many of the problems that you see at Harvard do you think are specific to Harvard versus across higher education across the US? And I guess the addendum that I'd add to that is, like, to what extent do you think getting these right at Harvard can play a broader role in helping to shape either education or society?
Yeah, I mean, my take on this, and this is part of the reason I'm so passionate about it, is I am a proud Harvard alum, but I really think Harvard sets the tone for a lot of higher ed. And it's the best known education brand in the world, right? And because it's the best known education brand in the world, there's a few things that come of that. One is people fight over it, right? The stakes feel higher because people think that by influencing Harvard, right, in various ways, for various causes, that they influence a lot of other people. They're setting a tone at higher ed. So there's a lot more pressure at Harvard. It's harder at Harvard than almost anywhere else as a result, right? Because everyone recognizes that. And I think that creates extra challenges. But I do think on the flip side that, those people who kind of try to influence Harvard or kind of recognize that they're not wrong, right? Which is, it's such a big brand, it does set a tone. And so if you can solve them at Harvard, if you can solve the problems or work on the problems at Harvard or get, move towards a place where, again, Harvard can, again, as it has been for 400 years, put scholarship first, foremost, and only, right? That is the goal, right? And think about how free speech and diversity, everything's an input to that goal. I do think it sets the tone and really does matter for a lot of other higher ed institutions. And I'd even go a step further, which is, look, one thing I think a lot about from like a technology and society perspective is, we're entering a really wild new world in a lot of ways, right? Like, and as the world gets wilder broadly and, people, choose their truths and things like that in all sorts of new and challenging ways, the reality is that having trusted institutions is becoming more important, not less important, right? And as a result, I just think the stakes are incredibly high for not just for Harvard as kind of a representation of higher ed, but for Harvard as a 400-year-old trusted brand, right, of truth. It's literally in the slogan of the school, right? That regardless of politics and regardless of kind of, how crazy the world gets in different directions, a broad set of Americans and hopefully the world can go back to and say, Harvard, what's coming out of Harvard is trustable and does matter. And we can trust regardless of kind of whatever our local realities look like. So I think I think it is very important from that perspective.
So I'm gonna remind everyone again, this is us trying to shine a light on Sam Lessin's attempt to get on the ballot for the overseers at Harvard. If you go to the website samforoverseer.com, it has both you can learn a little bit more about Sam, and it has instructions on how to use your Harvard Key account to nominate Sam. After which, if he gets nominated, you can decide whether or not you want to vote for him in the election. I will say it is not easy. Someone in the comments just noted it does take 24 hours for your Harvard Key account once you get it to be active. So
yes,
this is not a small feat. So I deeply appreciate anyone going through the process to do this.
Totally. I will tell you, that has been funny as a technologist at heart. I will admit that the 24-hour waiting period before you can vote is somewhat funny. I'll put it that way.
So one question that I'd love to get to is there's obviously a lot of questions about views on Harvard's opportunities and challenges, but as a person who is running to be involved in this, there are a few questions to the effect of, are you going to have the time availability to be active on the board of overseers while still being a full-time venture capitalist? And how do you think about the kind of the energy that you plan to bring to this, or the time commitment, or how you plan to engage? I think it might be useful to speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, look, the nice part about being an early stage venture capitalist is I do have a lot of control of my schedule. And I think from that perspective, Mark and Scylla know that for many years, I've been thinking a lot about like, what are ways that I can really make a difference? One of the things I've seen in my career and life is I've had these incredible moments where I've been involved in things that really made a difference. And it's a great thing. It's like sometimes you say you only get one or two of those in your life. I think, the time I got to spend with Mark was a time where I was like, this matters. Like I'm working on something that has global implications, and it's important. I'm not doing it just as a job. I'm doing it because I care, and I care about the outcomes. And I think the good news is I've had that moment a handful of times in my career, in my life, and I love being an early stage venture capitalist. For the LPs who are on the Zoom, I'm not going anywhere, and I think we're doing very well as a firm. But I do think that mission really matters. And when I see these opportunities, like with Harvard, this is kind of those types of opportunities you have to step up for and be willing to put the hard work into. because they're the ones that matter and they're the ones that you remember and they're the ones that you're proud of, right? So the upshot is yes, it is a lot of work. I'm gonna have to fly to Boston 6 times a year. I generally go to Boston once a year, right? And there's a bunch of hard work involved. But honestly, I think when you have the ability to organize your schedule to take on serious challenges like this, because it is a serious challenge. What else are you doing with your time? Like these are the important moments to activate for.
Yeah. Maybe one that I saw in the questions that is actually directed to me and Priscilla is what's driving your support of Sam's candidacy, other than your friendship with Sam and knowledge of his personal qualities. And there's an addendum of what do you think has gone wrong at Harvard. For me, this isn't about anything that's gone wrong. It's just that Priscilla and I are very invested in Harvard. We think it's important for the world for the reasons that I laid out up front, and we just believe that Harvard has the capacity to change the world in incredibly positive ways. We've invested a lot of our own time and capital in helping Harvard spin up different programs like this AI program to become a leader in that part of engineering and a bunch of other work around life sciences. And as part of this, we spend some time thinking about who are the people who can help steward and shape the university to be positive in the future. And I mean that's a lot of what I spend my time is judging which people will be best to lead or be involved in different projects. And from just having known Sam for a while and worked with him in different capacities um, and seen his work, at both at Meta and before when he was an entrepreneur starting companies, and now as an investor, helping foster a bunch of companies to be more successful, and engage in a number of other issues outside of that. Sam is the type of person who I would want to be involved in governing Harvard, and I'd feel a lot more confident in the future of the institution if Sam or more people like him were involved in this. And that's why I want to take the time to encourage all of you to go through the somewhat time-consuming process of setting up a Harvard Key account and
Not
doing
too bad.
nomination.
Not too bad. Don't be too scared.
All right. It's sure.
If
You
you
just have
have
to
a
wait
Harvard Key,
24
it's
hours
very
after
easy.
you do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's a good point. But no, I think for all the reasons that we're talking about, it's like the how well Harvard does, I think, has a direct impact on how much great research is created, and I think it has a unique ability to shape the whole field of higher education, which is obviously important to training whole generations of people. So, and I think we'll be better off, and Harvard will be better off if Sam or more people like that are involved.
Well, with that, Sam, I want to give you the chance to close us out.
Yeah.
And anything you want to add or make sure people know about you.
No, again, Mark and Scylla, thank you for joining. Everyone who's, voted or is on the Zoom or is willing to share kind of the message, I really appreciate all the work, that other people have put in. And again, this has been a whirlwind experience to drive, but it's been great. I mean, working with a bunch of people who have stepped up and said, not only do, we believe in kind of what you're doing, but we're willing to go out and not just vote, but like help you get votes from our class or spread the word of kind of the message of what you're doing or help people kind of through the process of voting. It's been really, really wonderful from that perspective. I really think this matters. I wouldn't be doing it if I didn't. And I do think, again, that I really have found this process to be more optimistic than I expected, that despite the challenges, which we all know, right, in various forms that Harvard has faced recently, and some of the problems that all of higher ed has now, the bones are great, right? To Mark's point, there's an incredible wealth of history and talent, and real, opportunity to do great things. So, rather than, giving up on Harvard, which, again, I'm very far from, and I know Mark and Scylla are and many others, I do think that this is a great moment to push a little bit, and I'm willing to do the work. So, again, to the extent that you guys are willing to go, I don't want to scare people off. If you have a Harvard Key, it's extremely easy to vote. If you don't have a Harvard Key, you have to do a little bit and then wait 24 hours. But please, look into the process. Go to samforoverseers.com. And I'd also say spread the word, because the reality is as much as there's a lot of intellectually interesting questions to ask about a lot of this stuff, ultimately this happens or not on a get out the vote campaign, right? So every time, emailing your college roommates or texting them and asking for support as well, it really does make all the difference. So thank you.
And do you have some sense or estimate of how close you are? I mean, obviously you don't you haven't gotten
So
notified yet
we
that
don't
you've
know in
crossed the
details, but
threshold,
like
but
we have until the 31st, so we're kind of right up against the end of the deadline here, right? And I think my sense is that we, if you need 3,300, we clearly still need at least 1,000, if not more, right? So we're making progress, but we still have some distance to cover. So that's kind of where we're at.
All right.
But
But yeah,
Well,
thank
thank
you.
you, everyone. It was nice sharing 30 minutes of this Friday afternoon, evening with everyone, and to get to highlight our friend Sam's passion and care. Sam, good luck. We'll be counting. We'll be
Thanks,
January
guys.
31st is the
Thanks,
deadline.
guys. And Mark, I'm going to put in an appeal for you on that honorary degree. I feel like that should count. I feel like you
You
should
need
be
a
able to
Harvard Key account? Mark, we'll email IT support and see if they can give you.
vote.
all right. Awesome. All right.
Thanks,
Have a good
guys.
weekend, everyone.
Bye.
Bye bye.